Gawain wiped his sweaty brow and surveyed the battlefield. Smoke rose from the fallen corpses of the aberrations. He saw Sir Philip swing his sword and cleave one of the final monsters in twain. As Philip's foe fell, Gawain could see no more living monsters around. Most of their flesh dissipated immediately after they were killed. Only their skeletons remained, which steamed as they slowly dissolved. Clan Cecil's makeshift army was scattered about the field. Some rushed around wild-eyed as they searched for new monsters to kill. Others hurried to aid their fallen comrades, but all were on high alert, albeit tired. Sir Byron removed his helmet. A billow of steam poured forth, like he was a cook opening a simmering pot of rice. "Victory! Huzzah! 3 cheers for Clan Cecil!" The soldiers followed Sir Byron's example. These cheers were echoed throughout the camp by the non-combatants who had waited anxiously by their homes, ready to flee in case the battle were to turn sour. Gawain laughed to himself. These cheers were strong enough to echo off the banks of the White River. No matter how far afield, all 800 of them now knew of this victory, and to those people who had lived through the old Cecil catastrophe, this victory meant more than any ordinary triumph. Apart from the key engineers and strategists, most would never know how much of this win was due to favourable timing, geographical positioning, and pure luck. They would only know that their meagre fighting force defeated hundreds of monsters invading from their south, outnumbered 10 to 1. None even breached the camp wall. The cheers of triumph swiftly turned into hollering of wild joy. Amber and Dame Heidi rushed back into camp. Relief washed over them as they beheld the sight of civilians, serfs, and artisans alike shouting, kissing, and hugging each other. Some cried with relief, and some hollered at the sky in pure primal emotion. Amber looked around curiously. She noticed that Gawain wasn't celebrating with everyone. She glimpsed Betty walking past, followed by the druid, Lauren Pittman. Both of them had their arms full of various vials and jars, presumably filled with potions. Amber skipped up to them. "Betty, where's the old guy?" Betty shrugged, then yelped as a precariously balanced glass nearly toppled onto the ground. "I don't know," Pittman chimed in. "He's in the tent at the southern side. I think something went wrong with that dragon egg again. Come on, Betty, we still have plenty of wounded soldiers to see to." Betty nodded. Then she and the little man dashed off. Amber shrugged and disappeared into the shadows. In the southern part of the camp, Gawain had attempted to have the egg's tent rebuilt, but as it was, it stood with a massive hole in its top. Gawain and Rebecca stood in front of the rock ball, sizing up the thing that was suddenly so active. Sir Byron and Sir Philip were in charge of cleaning the battlefield, while Gawain and Rebecca dealt with their new guest. The thing that they had suspected to be a dragon egg hovered in the air before them, only about 4 inches above the ground. Though it had no eyes, it seemed to be regarding Gawain. To be honest, I was scared to death earlier. Those creatures, what are they? Why did they single me out? Gawain folded his arms and shook his head. "I don't know why they went to you specifically, but why were you afraid? You smashed a dozen of them by yourself without even the slightest bit of damage done to you, and you've been able to move and speak this entire time." Gawain glared at the orb, which waggled slightly. He suspected that had the thing a face, he'd want to punch it for its impertinence. "Is it wrong to have self-interest? I didn't know of your intentions. I was waiting until you revealed them to me. Then I heard the commotion outside and I decided to check it out. However, the moment I moved, the monsters rushed toward me." Gawain nodded. He had figured out the entire course of things. This rock ball had clearly repressed a certain spirit of its own, thus its sense of presence was faint. Even Pittman only discovered signs of life by accident, by moving when the monsters were around. This thing inadvertently let leak some of its power, which probably attracted the monsters, who were driven crazy by the taste and smell of anything magic. He put his hands on his hips. "Are you still planning on escaping now? You were lucky it was only those few that made it all the way to you. If more attacked, we might not have been able to save you." Just like in St. Soniel, Rebecca watched her ancestor intently, learning from his negotiations. It seemed he was trying to intimidate this rock ball. Whether it would work or not was a different story. The rock scooted back a few inches, as if surprised by the suggestion. I'm not escaping. This place is too dangerous for me to leave on my own. Besides, I'm starting to believe what you said earlier. Gawain cocked his head. Earlier? The sphere bobbed slightly. You are not the same people who trapped me underground all those years ago. Probably not anyway. In a poof of shadowy mist, a certain half-elf emerged from the shadows. Her eyes were wide as she examined the floating rock sphere. How'd you figure out we're not the others? Gawain might have scolded her, but the question was on the tip of his tongue too, so he observed the sphere for its answer. The rock bobbed up and down for a moment. Your group is more shabby than they were. This huge camp doesn't even have a magic cannon. Gawain pressed his lips together in a thin line. Rebecca nodded, fascinated. That does make sense. What's a magic cannon? Gawain rubbed his forehead, annoyed. Amber strolled over to him and whispered in his ear. If I were you, I'd have kicked this embarrassing descendant out of the family as soon as you were out of your coffin. Gawain gave Amber a sardonic half-smile. Oh, and she's the embarrassment now. Careful, remember what they say about people in glass houses. Amber scoffed. Glass houses? That's dumb. Why would anyone live in a glass house? Gawain groaned to himself, another earth idiom that didn't translate. He turned back to the sphere. So, you've finally caught on to the fact that we're not the same. The sphere seemed to look at Gawain. I only believe that you aren't accomplices with those others. I didn't say that I would believe everything you say, especially since apparently 1,000 years have gone by. It paused, as if mulling something over. Though during the battle, you did make quite an effort to save me, so I guess I will believe that you mean me no harm. Gawain shook his head. Why am I always attracting people who drive me crazy? The rock's impertinence was easily excused by its poor treatment at the hands of the Gondolians, so Gawain nodded. Very well, trust can be slowly built. Wait, turn to the side and let me have a look to the left. Turn to the left. Rebecca and Amber also moved closer, curious while the rock ball wobbled a bit, puzzled. Why? Is there something on me? The sphere turned a little to the side. Amber finally knew what Gawain had found. On the lower half of the ball, a small piece of the originally impervious, rock-like outer shell had fallen out, and there were several long cracks that extended out from the fallen spot, already reaching the midpoint of the object. Rebecca gasped and looked back up towards the middle of the sphere as if trying to look it in the face, even though it had no face. You seem to have cracked. Are you in pain? The orb floated in the air, seeming surprised again. Oh, I must have cracked my shell when I was smashing myself down on monsters. Gawain eyed the damage warily. Is it okay that your shell is cracked? Shall I fetch a mason to see to your wound? Or a blacksmith? The sphere moved back and forth like it was shaking its head. Forget it. It's time for me to shed the shell anyway, if you're not my enemy. It seemed to think for a moment, then spoke again. Move further away. I'm going to break out of my shell entirely. Rebecca and Gawain stood back. Amber gasped. You're coming out of your shell? Wait, I have to find some people. Amber vanished into the shadows. The ball didn't say anything for a few seconds. Should I wait? Gawain nodded. She'll be back soon. She always has her own outlook. It was barely a few minutes before Amber returned, followed closely by Dame Heidi and Lauren Pittman. Both the mage and the druid gasped and regarded the floating sphere with awe. Heidi cleared her throat. Ancestor, what's going on? Pittman gasped. That dragon egg is about to hatch. Amber chirped and hopped up and down in excitement. That's why I got you two. By the way, do you two know how to take care of a small dragon man? Heidi and Pittman looked at Amber confused, but before they could answer, an unusual low hum came from inside the rock, like the building energy in a plane's engine. The surface of the sphere began to vibrate violently. The cracks lengthened and deepened. Tiny pieces of the sphere broke off, and then huge chunks did. Everyone was silent, watching the process with anticipation. Finally, a huge crack split through the center of the sphere, and all that was left of its outer shell fell outward, crashing onto the soft ground. There were many things that could have walked out of the shell and not surprised the assembled group. This was not one of them. They all stared in mute astonishment as they beheld the rock sphere's new form. Gawain, Rebecca, Dame Heidi, Amber, and Lauren Pittman stared at the new form that the mysterious sphere took. Now that its shell had broken away, it was a slightly smaller metallic sphere. It was shinier than it had been before, with a diameter of a little over 4 feet. The surface was pure silver and was as smooth as a mirror. To Gawain, it looked as if this object had been polished by a machine. It floated about 1.5 feet above the ground. Amber broke their stunned silence. "Well, I guess the whole time you were an egg's egg." Gawain smirked to himself. In Mandarin, calling it egg was close to naming it after some sensitive parts of the male body. But even without this knowledge, the sphere seemed displeased with this assessment. It rattled a bit. "I will not accept this name. Egg? Is that a name? Look at me. Do I look like an egg to you?" Rebecca wandered around the sphere as curious as a cat. "We thought you might be a dragon egg." The Viscountess carefully reached out her staff and poked the thing's surface. It didn't seem to notice. "Who would have thought that an egg hatched out of another egg?" The metallic ball quivered, as if it was exasperated by this line of conversation. "I'm not an egg. You're an egg. I should call you Egg. My whole tribe looks like this." Gawain stepped in. He couldn't let this childish argument continue, not without risking snapping at them both. "Your tribe, you say? What manner of creature are you? Why have I never seen others like you? You're no dragon, clearly, but that doesn't answer our question." He didn't voice this aloud, but he especially wondered why he had never glimpsed these spherical beings while he had been floating in the sky for generations. Unless he had blacked out and missed it. The round ball stopped vibrating. It wobbled back and forth like a buoy in a strange tide. "That's for me to know. I still don't know if I can trust you barbarians. Besides, I can't carry on a conversation with you if you don't even get my name right. I won't be called Egg." Dame Heidi took this moment to chime in. "Do you have your own name?" The sphere froze. It hovered around the tent, as a person would pace around a room in deep thought. It muttered to itself, "Name. I should have a name." Then it stopped. "I've forgotten." Everyone looked around, confused. Gawain coughed. "Then why do you object to them naming you?" "They can suggest a name, but I won't be called Egg." Gawain shook his head in frustration. "Do I have to call you St. Nicholas Egg for you to be okay with it?" The metal ball faltered for a moment. It moved from side to side energetically, like a happy child. "Oh, I like that name." Gawain closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He found himself wishing he had been more into yoga back on Earth. Some insufferable schoolmates of his would be very helpful in calming his nerves at the moment. "Well, St. Nicholas Egg, here's where things stand. If you wouldn't mind, could you please stay here for one more day? We just defeated an army of monsters and there's a ton of troublesome follow-up we need to do. Cleaning, repairing, treating the wounded. I don't need you to create more chaos at the moment." The metal egg floated down and landed on the ground. But unlike before, it rocked on the floor, as if it was assuming a comfortable position. "Of course, I can't be bothered to run everywhere. Today has me frankly exhausted." Gawain nodded. He didn't trust the egg, and wasn't sure if it was capable of remaining out of trouble, but for now he had to go along with it. The group bade farewell to the egg and left the tent. Heidi walked up to Gawain and hissed at him. "Are we just going to leave it like that?" Her eyes glittered with curiosity. Gawain recognized that look immediately. Dame Heidi was a researcher at heart, so she had a boundless interest in discovery and exploration. It was unlikely she had ever encountered something like this before. Gawain hoped she wouldn't sneak into the tent and try to slice the sphere open and see what was inside. He shook his head. "We can no longer study it at our leisure. It can move, it can think, and we have already seen some of its metal-controlling powers. Nothing good can come from trying to restrain it. Let's give it a chance to cooperate first." With that, he glanced at the soldiers standing guard not too far out. These soldiers were still keeping guard at the barrier line set at more than 15 feet from the tent, according to previous orders. Although they could not confirm whether this distance was outside of the metal control range of Nicholas Egg, it gave the soldiers a bit more peace of mind. He grimaced and turned back to Heidi. "We'll still have to strengthen the security, change the militiamen to soldiers and all that. Tell those soldiers in advance that the sphere stores an ancient soul from the old empire, so they cannot interact with it. It appears to be cowardly, but it is more than capable of defending itself. I saw that firsthand when it killed aberrations by throwing itself upon them." His descendant nodded. "What exactly do you think it is? Could it be a magical creation of the Gondolians?" As they talked, the group walked away from the tent, still speaking quietly, lest any prying ears catch something they didn't want to divulge. Gawain shook his head. "Even the Gondolian Empire wasn't omnipotent. This is beyond them, creating a creature of such intelligence." He didn't dare to completely eliminate the possibility that the ball was a man-made object, but at the least he could certainly confirm that the ball wasn't a creation of any race on this continent. In actuality, he was leaning more towards the belief that the ball really came from some strange, intelligent race outside of human knowledge. The biggest question he had was how it ended up in Lauren in the first place. Heidi bowed her head and sank into thought, but next to her, Pitman grumbled. Gawain smirked. "Yes, Pitman, do you have something to say?" The druid's eyebrows flew up in the air. His brows were so furrowed that it looked like they would fuse together. He coughed and spoke. "Why is that egg still an egg? Shouldn't it have become a dragon hatchling?" Amber guffawed. "Why are you so attached to the dragon egg theory?" The old man grumbled and scratched his neck. "It has to be a dragon egg. When it hatches, it will be a dragon. Then do you know how much money it could be exchanged for? Even if no one will buy it, I could take it to the Sacred Dragon Kingdom up north and they would make me an earl on the spot. Or maybe a count." Gawain chuckled. "From what I've heard, the Sacred Dragon Kingdom would hang you 40 times for that thought alone. Forget your schemes. Tell me, how are the wounded?" The druid straightened his back. "My lord, I have sent the best potions that I could produce to the infirmary. We won't lose a single person. In fact, it's incredible that we haven't lost any at all. Of all the casualties of the battle, many were wounded, some badly wounded, but none died." Gawain nodded, pleased. "You've underestimated the equipment of the Gonodlian Empire. During its heyday, it was difficult to kill a soldier when they were equipped with enchanted items." The druid scoffed. "Then you better talk to your knights. I heard them saying that most of the enchanted equipment has been damaged beyond repair. They may have worked this one time, but future battles cannot be won this way." Gawain stopped walking and gazed out over the camp. In the orange glow of the evening, the fledgling civilization was still abuzz with life. From a glance, no one could tell they had been fighting not half a day before. "No need to worry, we already have weapons. Even better weapons. More importantly, we have better ideas." He shot a wink at Rebecca, who averted her gaze. Amber spoke up. "Are you referring to the explosive crystals?" Gawain nodded lightly. Amber waggled her head. "Come on, most of those are pretty good, but they won't work in every situation. Even though we were in the Shadow Realm, that explosion knocked me off my feet. Your bimbo granddaughter only shielded herself." Heidi glared at Amber and lit a fireball. She held it up threateningly. The thief flinched and hid behind Pitman. Gawain ignored the bickering between his great-great-great-granddaughter and the meddlesome half-elf. He only smiled as he looked out into the distance. On the horizon, the massive sun was slowly setting. The rays glistened in gold, pink, purple, and orange. The rays cut through rosy clouds at the skyline, and even the billowing smoke from the battlefield shone as if they were magic powder rather than aberration remains. He sighed to himself. Anything would be flawed when it first emerged. Now that they had defeated the first wave of monsters, it was time to fix those flaws. After the crisis of the monsters had been averted, Gawain and his subjects resumed their work. The injured required recuperation. As brilliantly as the plan had worked out, soldiers still fought against the towering monsters, and quite a few on the front lines were injured. Reparations also had to be made to parts of the camp, especially around the Nicholas Egg tent. The frightened residents of the territory also had to be assuaged, and all construction efforts had to be put back on track again. Such were the numerous responsibilities when it came to pioneering a new territory. The first thing Gawain did was gather all the blood-red skeletons that accumulated outside the camp, Mountain Pass and Mountain Path. He used up a third of the Cecil clan's manpower to transport those remains as quickly as possible before they disintegrated. He had the people stack the brittle red remains along the southern bank of the White River into a fearsome mountain of bones. As they slowly disintegrated, red and black mist swirled up into the sky, turning the air dense with unease. Like a formless flame, the pile of bones burned. It was all that remained of the sludge-like monsters. Of the bones, Gawain picked out skeletons without broken or missing bones and propped them up using wooden stands. He placed them in a half-circle along the south of White River. From the perspective of the civilians in the middle of the territory, it looked as though the northern edge of the camp had a new perimeter wall, a wall of bones. Before the pile of remains, Gawain ordered the building of a wooden platform. The commoners and serfs watched in horror and disgust, maintaining a good distance. Mothers and fathers kept their young ones far from this side of the camp. These were beasts that had torn them apart from their homeland, separated families, and killed loved ones. Even if the explosions and overwhelming victory dispelled a portion of that fear, monsters were still monsters. When the platform was finished, Gawain stood atop it. Behind him the red bones piled so high it blocked the sun. The crimson smoke billowed out like ghastly spectres. The soldiers ran around the homes and tents, banging on doors and calling to the civilians. "Stop work, everyone! The Grand Duke demands your presence along the south bank of the White River. Please make your way there now in an orderly fashion." Though some seemed ambivalent about getting so near the monster's remains, all of them obeyed the orders of the Cecil Lord. The 800 or so individuals gathered along the plaza by the south bank, before the wooden platform. Gawain looked to Heidi, who cast a sound amplification spell. A shimmering aura appeared around Gawain's head, swirling until it entered into his mouth. He cleared his throat, and the sound that escaped out was far louder than a human could normally make. Gawain held out his hands and addressed his people. "Residents of the Cecil clan, today I have 3 things to announce." Gawain raised his sword of the founder and pointed it at the rows of skeletons that were arranged along the riverbank. "First of all, cause for celebration. These monsters that once destroyed the Cecil territory, that once massacred your brothers, sisters, and friends, that threatened all of our lives a mere few months ago, these monsters have been vanquished." Uproarious applause broke out. The cheers began with the group of soldiers. Sir Byron and Sir Philip threw their fists into the air. Even the injured let out the most primal of yawps they could muster. For those who fought the monsters personally, the victory was an especially sweet one. The applause and cheers cascaded to the rest of the civilians. Though they had assumed a pile of monster corpses meant an overwhelming victory, hearing the Duke and the soldiers cheer so jubilantly erased all remaining fear in their hearts. Gawain continued. "These monsters met us head-on and suffered a crushing defeat. They numbered nearly 1,000, a number nearly 10 times the camp's defensive force. But they were ultimately unable to take even half a step into the camp." He gestured to the red bones. "We've all witnessed the terror these sludge-like aberrations can wreak. But yesterday we proved that they are not undefeatable." More cheers and uproarious applause broke out. The atmosphere of the plaza buzzed with passion and excitement. Some bold parents even lifted their children onto their shoulders to get a better look at Gawain and the monster remains, their horror at the monsters dispelled by an overwhelming feeling of victory. Gawain hoisted his sword as high into the air as possible. "To celebrate, come nightfall, all of us will feast on meat soup and the finest Tanzan town ale." A silence broke out at first. The serfs and commoners shared a look. Even the soldiers looked bewildered. Seeing that Gawain did not laugh it off as a joke, the Cecil clan broke out into the loudest of cheers yet. Everyone erupted in joy and celebration. It was so loud Gawain surmised that even the folks over in Tanzan could hear the cheers. He grinned and scanned the faces of all 873 of his subjects. Some were laughing and joking. Soldiers slapped each other's backs. Couples hugged in silence, simply thankful that peace could be had. Some cried out of sheer joy. Serfs chatted excitedly about the prospect of meat soup. He held up a hand and waited for the crowd to die down. I have 2 more announcements to make. I want to express my sincerest gratitude to everyone for their contributions to the defense of our territory. The craftsmen and the apprentices and blacksmith Hummel and all of the soldiers, from Sir Byron all the way to our newest recruits, the camp stands because of you. Gawain purposely paused. A solemn, heartfelt atmosphere replaced the jubilance. He looked at Rebecca and Heidi, who smiled just below the platform. All around, the soldiers quieted. The workers of the camp smiled, hanging on to Gawain's every word. The serfs had never seen anything like it before. A noble expressing gratitude to everyone, including them. The sun falling was more likely. Gawain opened his arms, gesturing to the camp. This piece of land is not just my territory, it is also your home. The people who defend this piece of land are not just the Lord and the Lord's army. Each and every one of you sacrificed something to defend this land. You smelted slags in the hot furnace. You gathered the crystalline fragments. You produced hunting traps and wooden boxes. You harvest herbs. You washed the soldiers' clothes. You carved holes in the western cliff and dug holes along the mountain path. Everything everyone here did amounted to the protection of your homeland, the protection of those you love. The soldiers and citizenry hollered out. Those who remained quiet were in utter disbelief. Amber, thick in the middle of the crowd, muttered to herself, "Is this old geezer sick in the brain? He's admitting in front of everyone that the commoners are just as valuable as the nobles." Gawain gestured for people to come up. Commoners, labourers and soldiers alike followed each other up, at the behest of Heidi and Sir Philip. They walked stiffly onto the platform and stood nervously behind Gawain. Stonemason Gordon took a half-step forward, almost ending up in the same position as Gawain. Standing in front of such a large crowd, he didn't even notice. The old man trembled as Gawain chuckled. "Come join Gordon, everyone, stand with me." The crowd murmured amongst themselves, "That's old man Gordon. Isn't that Hunter by the side, the one who hunts? What about that skinny fellow? Isn't he one of the serfs? Holmes, was it? That's right, I saw him smelting slag at the furnace." Another man pointed to a soldier. "That's Crim. I heard he killed 4 monsters all by himself yesterday. His brothers and sisters did not manage to escape our old territory." Gawain's voice echoed out again, interrupting the murmurs. He gestured to the people by his side. These are the people who made the greatest contributions during the camp's defense. They are each outstanding individuals, soldiers who fought with all their might, craftsmen who worked day and night, and brave residents who remained vigilant throughout the preparations. Gawain turned to a few of the men on the platform. "Holmes, Terry and Wyatt, the 3 of you are now free citizens. Seize life by the throat, own property, and take responsibility for your own actions from here on out." The serfs in the crowd murmured. All of them could not believe what they just heard. Gawain turned to Gordon and the others. "Stonemason Gordon, Huntsman Hunter and Crim. The 3 of you shall obtain newly ploughed land among the first batch of people to receive your homes after their construction. Additionally, Crim, due to your outstanding bravery, Sir Byron has declared his intention to take you under his wing. Should you accept, you will be his disciple and learn the trades of a proper knight." Gawain procured copper crests from his armour and pinned each of them one by one on the 6 honoured members of the clan. The crest was simple and crude, a mere flattened piece of copper with the carved insignia of the Cecil clan. Holmes flipped it around and saw the words, "Battle of the Southern Camp Commemoration Badge." The serf did not know how to read, but the simple badge brought him to tears. Even though the copper was useless, everyone understood what it meant. The badges were symbols of glory. The onlookers looked with a smidge of envy, all of them coveting the crude copper badge for themselves. Even Amber amid the crowd grumbled to herself, "Where's my badge? I did my fair share too." Gawain smiled, seeing the recipients of the copper badges stand with pride. He knew exactly what he was doing. By establishing this merit system, everyone would seek to become equally upstanding citizens of the clan. Gawain cleared his throat and faced the crowd again. Now I have one final announcement to make. It is about the territory's army. Armies of this world were, in Gawain's eyes, barbaric. Within the borders of the Anzu kingdom, civilization had severely regressed. Production capabilities were at an all-time low. Aristocrats were divided, and the top brass of the military had a flimsy, unspoken alliance at best. While the kingdom as a whole could be called united, in reality every noble clan operated their own independent mini-kingdoms. The king was a king by title, but was really just the biggest feudal lord among the nobles. The kingdom's military was separated into clusters. Beyond the royal knights of St. Soniel, the remaining personnel were the soldiers of individual clans. The soldiers served their clan's leaders, first and foremost. Even if a viscount commanded a massive army, they did not belong to the king, unless the viscount agreed. A noble clan seeking to wage war assembled an army through prestige, by allying with other lords to rally private troops to assist in the battle. What better way in this kingdom to possess prestige than by having money? Large armies in the current age were made up of mercenaries, all of them flying different banners, but brought together because of the promise of riches. It was a decent motivation, but in the heat of war, fleeing was commonplace. Without loyalty to the cause, most would choose their life over money. The result of such a system was obvious. The kingdom lacked a unified professional army. There was no standardized regimen for training soldiers. It was each noble clan's discretion to assemble private armies. Weapons were different. Hierarchies were different. Every logistic was different. The consequences of such a disorganized, disparate system were severe. Armies lacked efficiency, combat strength, and structure. Without standards for selecting soldiers, the overall quality was low and the number of deserters was high. Most soldiers in these armies only knew how to follow the general and charge. Gawain knew all this as he stood on the wooden platform, surveying his subjects. 800 or so people waited for him to make his third and final announcement. Lady Rebecca made an advancement to our military system recently. She made it possible for serfs to enlist in the militia. I want to advance it further. Gawain smiled as the crowd broke out in whispers and murmurs. The Cecil clan's military system, by his standards, was already quite superior. As a southern clan, they retained a heavy emphasis on military tradition over the centuries. Apart from official soldiers, the Cecil clan also had trained militia. The knights of the clan trained enlisted citizens and used a standard model of training for everyone. This was effectively a military reserve. When these citizens weren't needed, they were doing their own thing, tilling the fields, manning the furnaces, and crafting goods. But when called upon, the Cecil clan could muster a large number of reserve troops in the case of an emergency. Gawain thought to himself, this is all already quite good. But considering my future plans, I'll need an even more professional and specialized army. Gawain cleared his throat. From here on out, I am ending the system of military reserves. Rebecca frowned. Murmurs broke out across the crowd again, but Gawain raised a hand. There will be no difference between full-time knights and enlisted soldiers. Instead, there will be a unified combat corps. Every soldier in this corps will follow a new and unified training regimen, and every single soldier in the combat corps will earn a salary. More murmurs broke out, louder now and filled with confusion. Gawain chuckled. This kind of announcement must be surprising for the people of this world. A noble clan's soldiers never earned a salary. They prepared their own weapons and their own rations. Their incentives were purely based on whatever they could plunder. Usually, soldiers were allowed to keep half the spoils. That was their reward. Of course, military tradition made things different in the Cecil clan. Soldiers were supplied with weapons and equipment. Rations were issued when they were needed. But still, soldiers did not have salaries, and these rations were always only enough to barely get by. Gawain addressed his people again. Soldiers will be issued salaries and they will be forbidden to plunder. He detailed different ranks and the different levels of salaries. Those who want to earn higher salaries may do so through a promotion system, Rather than earn your riches by plundering like savages, by outstanding military service, you may earn higher and higher wages for you and your families. Gawain held out his arms. I know plundering isn't a welcome habit within the Cecil clan already, but I thought I should make it clear anyway. It is now illegal to do so. Whether you are a serf or a citizen, if you join the army, you will earn a wage and you will be following the same set of rules for promotions. Now, on to the next matter. He paused and surveyed the crowd. From here on out, every adult male shall have mandatory military training during the idle season of farming. It is no longer an enlistment, but compulsory training. Gawain expected some dissent. He expected some disappointment and anger amongst those in the crowd. Some were utterly shocked by the news. Wives held husbands close, already fearing the worst. At the same time, Gawain saw a lot of understanding looks and motivated nods. Fresh off the battle against the monsters, he could tell that everyone was electrified. Seeing bronze badges handed out must have inspired many as well. Gawain sighed. Let me finish. Compulsory military service does not mean you will have to fight in a war. It is merely to ensure that adult males all have basic military skills, so that in a time of crisis, we will be ready as a clan. Everyone eased a little. In fact, the thought that they could make some money serving in the Cecil military during the off-season of farming provided something to look forward to. As long as they could keep their bellies full, could they really complain? The serfs muttered amongst themselves. For them, it was a rare opportunity to become official soldiers and earn some prestige. All they had to do was do military training when there were no fields to till or crops to harvest. Of course, it was worth it. Gawain saved the intricate details for a later time. There was far more to get into at a later time. He went on roughly about the combat corps before he clapped his hands together. All right, that's enough from me. Yesterday's victory was an important one. Let the pile of monster bones behind me serve as a constant reminder. When we work together as a clan, we will prosper. It comes down to the soldiers, the craftsmen, the citizens, the serfs. All of you have a reason to celebrate tonight, and celebrate. We will. He raised his sword in the air. The festive, jubilant mood returned in full blast. The crowd hollered and danced. Soldiers clapped and laughed. Gawain stepped off the platform and joined the massive crowd in the small camp plaza. Everything he had announced today was just a foundation. All he had right now were 100 soldiers out of 800 people. But 1 to 8 was already a sizable ratio. Gawain guessed that the kingdom's total militia might be 1 to 40, if not 1 to 80 of the total population. Even during war, a clan's total army did not usually exceed 10% of the population. Gawain smiled. In times of peace, his 100 soldiers were a competent construction army, and with the enchanted armor and weapons from the mountain facility, in times of war they were a formidable force. They proved it yesterday after all. Gawain joined Sir Philip and Sir Byron. He patted both of them on the back. We'll talk details about the combat corps soon. The priority for now is to get the celebrations for tonight ready. Both knights nodded and moved out at once, barking orders. Gawain knew the success of the Cecil clan's military thus far had hinged on veterans like them. They were loyal and sticklers to tradition. They made sure no recruits slacked off, and they also made sure no soldier felt belittled. Gawain looked out the Cecil territory, towards the horizon where the setting sun had half disappeared. 800 citizens. That is what needs to change first. In order to keep up with my plans, I'll need to attract more people to the Cecil clan. Everything is wishful thinking if my population can't keep up. Forget the modern army, forget high-end infrastructure, forget it all. Gawain's eyes narrowed. No, before more people come, the framework of this territory has to be more firmly set. He looked at Rebecca. Grab Heidi and the rest of the supervisors. I want to speak with Norris, the agricultural manager. Hummel too, regarding all steelwork matters. We'll have to discuss our next steps in detail. In Gawain's tent, Dame Heidi, Rebecca, Norris, Pitman, Sir Byron, Sir Philip and old Hummel all gathered around the Duke who stood over his desk. Even Amber sat on a cushion beside Rebecca. She was the first to speak. Boss, mind if I go? You don't need me here. I'm not going to understand a word of what you are talking about. Gawain shook his head as he surveyed some documents. If you go, you'll just make trouble elsewhere. You're staying here. Amber growled at him like a feral cat, but he ignored her and focused on the others gathered around. Now I gathered you all here because I wanted to explain one thing. The crisis is not over. Rebecca's eyes bulged out of her head. She looked at Gawain with a stunned expression on her face. But we killed all the monsters. Gawain held up a finger. We killed some of the monsters. Who's to say there aren't more out there? A tense silence elapsed, and each of those assembled looked at each other. The farmer Norris recoiled at the notion and twisted his facial features. News of more monsters was definitely disquieting for someone who was interested in the health of the earth. By contrast, old Hummel, sitting beside the farmer, looked perfectly at peace with his new place among these important members of the clan. He had plenty of experience dealing with aristocrats, so he was as calm as he could be. Heidi noticed Norris's nervousness, but she did not say anything. Instead, she carried on with Gawain's line of conversation. But we inspected the Great Barrier from afar. Ancestor, you're not worried about its self-repairing capability? Gawain pressed his hands together thoughtfully. We did note that it repaired itself, yes, but we have no way of knowing if it will be compromised again. He looked up, fixing his gaze upon each of the council in turn. Even though we have resolved this crisis, the victory isn't complete. The elves are master craftsmen, but they are not gods, and the Great Barrier is over 700 years old. Since it's aging, we have to be prepared for the possibility of another monster incursion. Amber folded her arms and grumbled. We should just run then! Though it was a somewhat off-handed remark, Gawain still turned to reply to the half-bored half-elf. Where to? If the Great Barrier fails in its entirety, there will be nowhere on the continent to hide. The Dark Wave's pollution will encompass all of Lauren in a matter of months. Gawain turned back to the others, knocking his hand on the desk. I'm only reminding you all because we shouldn't let our guard down. I don't believe that the Great Barrier is at imminent risk of collapse. We shouldn't be too worried. But nor should we be complacent. The others nodded, letting out sighs of relief. Sir Philip cleared his throat and shifted. He had long since removed his bloodied armour and looked strangely small in his normal tunic and breeches. My lord, may I speak candidly? Gawain waved his hand. Go ahead. Sir Philip nodded. Our victory was decisive, yes, but it was also lucky. If there had been even a few more monsters, or if some had managed to evade our traps, then we may even have been overrun. Those aberrations are far more durable than humans, and we know how they magically resonate with each other. The more there are, the deadlier their auras, which makes them harder to kill. Philip's voice trailed off. Gawain nodded slowly. This knight happened to be vocalizing just what was on Gawain's mind too. He nodded. We cannot be hoodwinked by our victory. We are more vulnerable than we've ever been. Now? Gawain clapped his hands together and rubbed his palms expectantly. Now, it's time to talk about subsequent plans. Dame Heidi cocked her head. Subsequent plans? Gawain nodded. Yes, we need to build walls, store up grains, increase the population, the production of steel. Gawain drummed his fingers on his desk. He turned to Rebecca. Any luck with cement? The young Viscountess sighed and shrugged. I'm afraid not. Then an idea seemed to spring up behind her eyes. Wait, no, there has been some progress. The other day we tried combining a type of porous rock with clay, and it seems to be producing something similar to what you desire. But we still need to perfect the optimal ratio of materials, the temperature, baking duration, and all that. Our progress on cement was also hampered by our need to produce so many crystals at once. Gawain smiled. Not bad. Just make sure you keep your work efficient, and we cannot stop production on Rebecca crystals. Let's keep at least a third of the furnace to those. We just built a new warehouse at the southwest side of the camp. That will be for crystals. Rebecca nodded, scrawling down notes on a pad of paper. With that, he turned to Norris. How goes the cultivation of the land? The old farmer stepped forward and squeezed his arm nervously. We have opened 1,000 square feet of cultivated land at the eastern and southern parts of the settlement. There we planted with sweetwood roots and fire leaves. The magic of Lord Druid and the potions that he created were both especially effective. The speed at which the crops are growing is scarily fast. We might be able to harvest even before Frost Month arrives. And at this rate, we will even have a surplus after feeding everyone. Gawain cut Norris off. You are the agricultural manager. You do not have to address people of the same rank as the Lord. In fact, you do not have to address me that way either. Call me by my official title or aristocratic rank. Norris nodded nervously. Yes, Duke. Pitman snorted. Now that's not fair. I'm so rarely called Lord Druid. Couldn't you have let me enjoy it for a little while? Norris ignored his colleague and spoke again. Also, the land on the northern banks of the White River seems promising. My people examined the quality of the soil there and found it exceedingly fertile. The only issue is that we would need to cross the river. Norris trailed off. He seemed incredibly anxious, like his ambitious plans hinged on this simple request. Gawain responded quickly. I approve. We will put that in motion in the second phase of our cultivation plan. That will necessitate a bridge. He looked over at Heidi. Would you mind writing this down, Heidi? She nodded and produced a pen and paper, which she used to take notes. Gawain rubbed his temples. The next item on our agenda should have to do with population. Heidi, what do you think about this? Heidi paused in her scribblings and flinched. There's no way around it, Ancestor. The quickest way to grow our numbers would be to buy serfs. In addition, we can take in refugees from some of the southern fiefdoms. Many minor disputes have broken out in recent years, displacing peasants of all stripes. They would be grateful for our resources and eager to lend numbers and strength to our family name. Speaking of this, Heidi grimaced. Though taking in people who have been on the road, that does open us up to the potential of people who have been driven from their territory for just cause. Robbers and pillagers. Public security would become a problem. Though as numbers increase, that's just the way it is. Amber chimed in. Gawain almost jumped as he had forgotten she was there. If abiding by the law promises a good and prosperous life, then a good half of the ne'er-do-wells would be law-abiding citizens. Nobody chooses to be rats because they like living in the sewers. Who would choose a life of starving and risking the whip just for the heck of it? Dame Heidi regarded Amber curiously. For once it seemed like the half-elf was talking sense, so she didn't retort. Gawain chuckled. What you say makes much sense. Until someone examines your record. You were trying to steal my silver stamp the other day, just for fun. You cheeky creature. Amber winked at him. I was joking with you. Gawain shook his head and returned to the matters at hand. Hummel, how goes steel production? While Gawain and his lieutenants discussed logistics, the civilians partied, but miles and miles away, a new presence was approaching them. A sturdy ship drifted down the White River. It was painted entirely white, as glistening as if it had never seen dirt, muck, or brine. On its mainsail was a crest, a green sword cleaving through a dark mass. It was the crest of Clan Moen, the royal family of Anzu. But on the side of the ship was another emblem entirely, painted in glittering gold. It was a circular ring, with intersecting rays of light radiating out from the middle. That was the symbol of the Church of the Holy Light. The ship sailed down the river and took a stop by Tanzan town. It was a rare sight to see a ship adorned with both the royal crest and the church's symbol. So the residents of Tanzan all gathered at the riverbanks to see what was afoot. Inside the ship, a woman knelt in the center of a cabin. She had long, pale blonde hair and high cheekbones. Even when no one was around to command, she carried a regal air with her. A tiny knock sounded from the other side of the door. The kneeling figure opened her eyes. Holy light glowed out from her as if she herself were her God's chosen vessel. After a moment, the knock was followed by a woman's voice, devoid of any emotion. Your Highness, we have arrived at Tanzan town. Do you wish for us to dock so you can meet with Viscount Andrew? The faint glow in the regal woman's eyes faded. She blinked. No, just send an envoy. I have had a revelation. We need to hurry to the New Cecil territory. There is something there the Lord wishes me to see. The voice on the other side of the door made no reply. but a sound of departing footsteps told the praying figure that her command was being carried out. Princess Veronica Moen narrowed her eyes slightly. Holy light floated in her eyes as if it could not be controlled. She closed her eyes fully and entered meditation once again. The next morning, a scout arrived at the fledgling Cecil township. They delivered a simple message to the guards on duty. The aid that the pioneering camp eagerly had been awaiting for more than a month was finally here. The soldiers took fast horses and sent this piece of news to camp at top speed. Gawain immediately halted his work on hand and headed to the camp's pier to prepare to receive them. The pier there had been reconstructed and built upon the foundations of the temporary pier. Although it had yet to achieve the standard for long-term use, it now had a broader jetty and was better suited for receiving goods by boat from Tanzan. To the west of it sat the timber mill, and to the east of it sat empty land which had been earmarked for future expansion. At this particular moment, many civilians, soldiers and tradesmen of Clan Cecil assembled in this empty land, some with their families, others with their friends. But they were all curious about the new contingent the capital had sent them. About half of the people in the entire camp had gathered there for this reception. Gawain did not stop all this. On the contrary, it was something he had specially permitted. The support contingent from the city of Sansoniel would significantly reassure the people of the territory. That, and there was little in the camp that provided adequate entertainment for the masses. Having some novel happenings in the territory was one of the most effective ways to raise the population's spirit. Amber stood on the walkway of the pier, alongside Gawain, Rebecca and Dame Heidi. The half-elf was propped on her tiptoes as she looked toward the upstream of the White River. Her body shook and swayed here and there without rest. After waiting for a short while, she could no longer hold it in. "Why aren't they here yet? I feel like I'm about to have cobwebs grow on me." Gawain rolled his eyes. "Only if you're beset upon by the speediest spider in Anzu. You just arrived. It's been only 15 minutes. Amber sighed. 15 years more like... Who's leading this little expedition? Gawain squinted thoughtfully at the horizon. Veronica, Francis II's only daughter, the saint princess who devoted herself to the holy light several years ago. Amber folded her arms and stroked her chin in a parody of her boss. Yes, she sounds like a lot of fun. Gawain nudged her. She may not be fun, but she is very interesting. This woman allegedly stays in the cathedral all year round and certainly never takes an interest in politics. Her arrival does certainly foreshadow something, though what I dare not guess. Amber laughed and hopped over to the edge of the pier. She removed her shoes and dangled her feet in the water. You aristocrats think too much, always analysing, second-guessing each other's motives, assuming you're all playing this big chess game. If someone farts too loudly, you assume it's a strategy. Heidi wrinkled her nose in disgust at Amber's speech. What a repulsive creature you can be, even after all we've taught you. Amber narrowed her eyes at the dame. After all you've taught me, why don't you try learning from the lower class for a change? Gawain grabbed Amber by the collar and pulled her to her feet. Hey, what's the big idea? Gawain pointed. Save it. They're here. The White River cut through several forests which obscured the upstream view. Just then sails emerged from the tree line. A large, graceful white ship appeared, followed by several medium-sized clippers. Gawain swallowed. He recognized Clan Moen's emblem. Without doubt, this was it, the ship that others referred to as the White Oak. And at the same moment, the people on White Oak also caught sight of the campsite by the riverbank in the distance. The craftsmen and apprentices had been pent up in their cabins for almost the entirety of the trip. Their endurance in all aspects had long reached their limit. Many of them rushed to the deck to behold their new home. Others that couldn't make it topside squeezed to the windows, gazing out at the approaching township in the distance. A vast, neat, brand-new campsite appeared in everyone's sight. The scale of that campsite was far bigger than they imagined, and the orderliness of it was astonishing. The people on board could not help but begin buzzing in low voices. They were aware of what had happened in the Cecil territory. They also knew that the pioneering camp had only started building a few months ago, and the total number of people participating in its construction was merely 800 refugees. Given the construction speed that people were acquainted with within such a short period of time and with so little manpower, being able to put up a messy tent and surround it with a fence was considered excellent progress. Yet what they saw was entirely more impressive. The Cecil clan's new township didn't look like only the product of a month's work. Craftsmen and experienced artisans peered as hard as they could at it, but even they couldn't find any evident shortcuts or flaws. They even caught sight of a lovely wooden pier beside the campsite, wooden houses, and many standing buildings. Princess Veronica stood near the prow of the ship. None of the passengers dared draw near her. The only people near her were a plain woman with short hair wearing priest robes and a middle-aged man wearing a silk jacket. The emblem of the Order of Knights was emblazoned on his chest. Veronica quietly surveyed the Cecil pioneering camp in the distance. Her gaze blazed with holy light and pierced her vision as if she was a falcon who hunted by sight rather than by talon. If she had opinions about the state of the Cecil camp, she certainly didn't share it with those around her. Instead, her gaze was focused on something far more troubling. The mountain of blood-red skeletons that lay in a heap by the river. A dark, hazy red mist drifted off the carnage, as if to further highlight them as a show of victory. In spite of the shocking sight, Veronica's face remained as stoic as it had when she was praying. But the same could not be said of the middle-aged man beside her. This guard who wore the emblem of the Order of Knights muttered several incantations softly after noticing the items beside the campsite. Following that, the glow of arcane energy emerged in his eyes. He looked in the direction of the camp, using enchanted eagle vision, and instantly could not help but cry out, "In the name of the king! What monstrous remains are those?" Veronica responded calmly. "Over 2 months ago, this Duke Gawain Cecil warned my father of the aberrations from the Dark Wave. They had re-emerged into this world. Apparently, this warning didn't stir up much attention." Her voice seemed far away, as if the world was an indifferent mass and could pass her by without comment. The middle-aged man grunted. "Well, we certainly need to report this to His Majesty." Veronica nodded and lowered her voice. "Yes, Vice Commander Cohen, but once we do, this will complicate matters." The Vice Commander winced. "Yes, the East." After that, he was silent. By this point, White Oak pulled up to the side of the jetty. Gawain watched as the winsome vessel steadily reduced speed. Its sails had been completely retracted, and some unnatural waves with magical power surged by the craft's 2 sides and precisely pushed the ship to the front of the pier. Many people stood on the deck, curiously looking in the direction of camp. Meanwhile, several sailors walked out from behind the crowd. They pushed the gangplank out and set it between the deck and the jetty. No sooner was the gangplank placed than a squadron of soldiers marched forward and parted in front of Gawain, Heidi, and Amber. They formed 2 parallel lines. Then 3 people marched down the middle. The one in the middle was the most striking. Her blonde hair glistened in the sunlight. Her high cheekbones, light blonde hair, and intelligent gaze reminded Gawain immediately of Prince Edmund Mohun, though she possessed an aloofness and beauty that her twin could only hope to grasp by association. Alongside her was another priestess, wearing the same white robes that the princess did, and on her other side was a squat, balding man, wearing the uniform of the Order of Knights, who looked refined and not unlike a general. Amber let out a low whistle. "She's gorgeous, even more beautiful than her portraits. What did she eat growing up?" She looked at Gawain for an answer, but noticed that he wasn't looking at the beautiful princess. He was instead staring straight towards the other priestess, the one who wouldn't stand out in a crowd. Amber tugged on his sleeve. Hey, what are you looking at? Do you have no sense of aesthetics?" Gawain blinked as if roused from a trance. He looked at Amber and frowned. "Aesthetics?" Amber flattened her mouth. "We're looking at a gorgeous, otherworldly princess, and you're fixated on her handmaid." Gawain took a deep breath in and out. He muttered his answer. "She just looks like someone I knew during my old life." Don't worry about it." With that, Gawain strode forward. Dame Heidi and Viscountess Rebecca followed close behind. When they stood opposite the princess and her assistants, Gawain bowed, and both Heidi and Rebecca curtsied. Raising his eyes, Gawain spoke. "Welcome, welcome. Your arrival has been the best news we've had in days. It is an honor, princess." The princess nodded toward him. "The honor is mine to finally be able to meet the legendary hero from 700 years ago." Gawain furrowed his brow. Her manner of speaking was unsettling. She reminded him of Earth's computer-generated voices that dispassionately announced train times. Then Veronica smiled. "You are so old, and yet so young. Shall I speak to you as an elder?" Gawain, too, smiled. "No need to worry about formalities, my princess. That would become tiresome very quickly. Let us speak as equals. We will welcome everyone from your ship with open arms. Our little village is far from the height of luxury, but I reckon flat ground will be preferable to your people than the rocking deck of a ship." While he spoke, his eyes thoughtlessly swept past the ordinary-looking short-haired woman beside Veronica. Everything he had told Amber about her being an acquaintance was naturally fake, because he had no way of explaining the real situation to anyone. In his eyes, the one standing beside Princess Veronica wasn't any woman wearing priest robes. She had the features of a human, but in all other aspects was merely a ball of translucent light. Gawain could not pry his gaze away. There was something frighteningly mesmerizing about the nameless woman's appearance. It was made all the more peculiar that no one else made any comment about her. To Gawain, she had all the features of a human being, but her entire body was translucent, gently glowing like a heavenly fluorescence. It was as though she was an elemental being, but elemental beings were far more formless than this. In all his eons observing the world as an eye in the sky, and even in all his memories as Gawain Cecil, he had never seen anything like her. Heidi barely looked at the woman, same with Rebecca. Amber, who usually had a peppy comment ready for anything, said nothing about the woman's appearance. Gawain gulped. "So I'm the only one who sees her in this light." He suppressed the astonishment and looked at Veronica. Gawain had to admit it. She possessed a dazzling presence. Her sheer aura commanded the attention of anyone who passed by. Amber leaned in. "It's said that the St. Princess exhibited astounding talent from a young age. In terms of magic and martial skills, she was far superior to the average person. But more than anything, she possessed immense spiritual affinity to the Holy Light. When she first walked into the Church of the Holy Light, the main tower's bronze bell sounded 3 times after being struck by holy light." Gawain nodded as Veronica approached. By the docks, Gawain bowed his head reverently and exchanged conventional aristocratic greetings. Veronica smiled, her eyes shimmering like copper in a fresh mountain spring. "It is a shame I didn't meet you in Sansoniel, the legendary Gawain Cecil. It is truly an honor." Gawain bowed again. "As you can see, milady, we've been hard at work developing the land. How is the king?" Veronica kept her smile, having had a lifetime of aristocratic small talk and formalities. She spoke with the air of royalty, her words calm and gentle but painstakingly deliberate. She knew the power that her words commanded, and she was ever so careful with them. "He gets older by the day, but ever the child at heart. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Veronica of the Church of the Holy Light." She gestured gracefully to the woman next to her. "This is Sandy, a high priestess of the church." Then Veronica introduced the man with the prominent emblem of the Royal Knights. "This is the King's Guard, the Vice-Commander of the First Order of Knights. His name is Cohen Lowland, and possesses the noble rank of Count." Gawain nodded and made a mental note. "Lowland? That must mean he's related to Silas Lowland, the Duke of the East." Veronica's lips curved upward. "He has forsaken the Lowland name to accept the honor of being part of the royal clan." Cohen bowed curtly. Gawain nodded. "Very well." He introduced Rebecca and Heidi and decided not to make any mention of Amber, who kept grumbling about when dinner would be served. Gawain turned to Heidi. "Please arrange for the 100 workers to disembark the ship. Have them stay at our finest accommodations." He turned back to Veronica. Please, join me in the central tent. They walked together into the camp. Cohen and the soldiers followed along when Veronica stopped. Count Cohen, please take the soldiers and rest. The handsome, middle-aged knight hesitated, but Veronica just smiled. We are in the Grand Duke's territory now. I do not think I will have to worry about my safety. Furthermore, do you not find it rude for so many soldiers to be following Duke Cecil? Cohen froze and gave a deep, apologetic bow to Gawain. Please accept my sincerest apologies. Gawain chuckled. It's nothing, really. Cohen dismissed the soldiers and followed after Veronica. The king had entrusted him to protect the princess, and he wouldn't need the other soldiers if something were to happen. He was a one-man army. As they walked through the camp, Veronica's gaze drifted to the southern bank of the White River. I can't help but notice the skeletons in the colour of carmine. Are they the aberrations you spoke to my father about, the ones that appeared during the Dark Wave? Gawain nodded grimly. That's right, milady. They are remnants of the great disaster from 700 years ago. The corpses, you see, appeared a few days ago, but we managed to stop them. On their bodies we found shards of weapons that belonged to the Gondolian Empire. Veronica's nose crinkled, her tone rising to astonishment. You don't mean... these monsters came from the Gondolian wasteland? Gawain nodded again. Cohen stepped in. That's impossible. You're saying they travelled past the Dark Forest and the Dark Mountains and the Great Barrier to get here. How could they ever pass through? Cohen looked out to the Dark Mountains. He fought the urge to scale the cliffs and check for threats. Gawain merely shrugged. The Great Barrier is intact. I've verified it myself. Though it still stands, I'm certain that it has deteriorated faster than we expected. Cohen shook his head in disbelief. The sentinel towers at the Great Barrier have always been monitored by the Sylvan Empire. The elves have never mentioned the problem of the barrier deteriorating for the past 100 years. Gawain glanced briefly at Amber. The half-elf was daydreaming, so she didn't notice his look. Gawain sighed. The elves are a race that can be trusted. At least the same group that worked together with us back then could be. 700 years for the elves is scarcely even one generation. The issue lies in communication. The wasteland separates the Anzu Kingdom and the Sylvan Empire in the south. If they're monitoring the towers from there, who knows if they even know about the northern sentinel towers? Cohen's brows furrowed. He could only admit Gawain was right. The elves' magic model had created the barrier that everyone called a miracle. Only they could control and monitor the sentinel towers. Compared to elven magic, human magic might as well be sputtering sparks to distract children. Gawain sighed. Human magic's advantage lies in abundance, especially back when the Azure Fount stood. Elven magic rested its laurels on sheer precision and technical mastery. Veronica broke the silence. I may have converted to the Church of the Holy Light, but that does not mean I have abstained from the kingdom's affairs. I will report on this situation to my father once I return. She looked out to the dark mountains with concern. If the Great Barrier continues to deteriorate, your territory will be the first to bear the brunt, Duke Cecil. I do not question your bravery, but for the sake of your citizens here, would you consider relocating? Gawain smiled cordially. Many thanks for your concern, milady, but we've dealt with the horde of monsters that occupied the mountains. There shouldn't be another invasion in a long while. The Great Barrier is deteriorating, but it will not collapse, and if ever it did, what corner of the continent would be safe from the Dark Wave? Veronica let out a gentle sigh. I fear for your subjects is all. Cohen's curiosity made him speak up again. Oh, respectfully, sir, how did you stop all those monsters? I felt how powerful they were from just the aura of their bones, and the military might of this territory, it's... Gawain chuckled before Cohen could reply. It was mostly luck. The monsters were unfortunate enough to be caught under a collapsing cliff. Veronica looked around the camp. I respect your decision, Duke Cecil, but you should know that if the situation in the south worsens, the kingdom won't be able to offer you any additional assistance. Gawain nodded. He had expected this. The Anzu Kingdom's current state did not leave much to be desired. Still, he sensed something more behind the princess's words. "Is there something wrong, milady?" It was Cohen who spoke up, possessing a grave tone. "The eastern borders." Gawain understood immediately. He remembered what Silas Lowland had been like as Duke of the East, with constant worries about the eastern border. The vice-commander let out a sigh. "Our kingdom and the Typhon Empire. I reckon soon there will be no possibility of peace." 700 years ago, no one would have fathomed war between kingdoms. Everyone had escaped the Gondolian wastelands. They all were refugees, deprived of their homes, and seeking to start anew. Disaster had brought people together. From the destruction of the old empire, new ones came to be. They shared resources and built up their new territories together hand in hand. Gawain could even remember working with the founder of the Typhon Empire. So to think that the two kingdoms were bound for war made Gawain's head spin. He put on a stiff expression, then faced Veronica and Cohen. "Has war been declared?" Count Cohen Lowland shook his head. "It is a mere step away. All diplomatic channels have been severed, soldiers line both sides of the border, no reason and communication remains. Both sides are now just waiting for whoever makes the first move. They say it will be lucky if it stays like this for another year." Rebecca brimmed with worry. "What about the Dark Wave? The weakened state of the Great Barrier will hurt the Typhon Empire too. The monsters that come will not discern between kingdoms. They will ravage us all." Veronica spoke softly, with the delicate air of royalty. "Before all diplomatic channels were severed, my father's last message to the Emperor of Typhon was a warning. He cautioned them on the changes in the Gondolian wasteland and heightened monster activity. He hoped that they would put down the foolish talk of vengeance in the face of such a crisis." Amber grew anxious, and then Veronica's face fell. "The Typhon Empire severed the magic relay station along the borders and stationed 30,000 more soldiers along the border. The border town no longer belongs to the people. It is a military camp." Rebecca scoffed. "How could they be so unreasonable? What did the Anzu kingdom do to make them hate us that much? The least they could do is give us a reply." Gawain shrugged. "Humans are motivated by greed and reputation. They have no reason to believe the words of our king. They would rather believe it was an excuse made to delay and gain an advantage in preparing for the war. Even if they believed it, they would likely let it happen and gamble on the outcome where the monsters tear through the Anzu kingdom first." Rebecca was shocked. "Why would they want that?" Gawain sighed. "So they could obtain the spoils of destruction." Rebecca shook her head, still in disbelief. "But the Dark Wave!" Gawain turned to the young Viscountess. "How many people do you think know about the power of the monsters? We've only witnessed a fraction of the true power of primal magic firsthand, and the Cecil clan nearly fell. But for those who have lived all their lives safely removed from them, hearing only of them in legends and folk tales, how afraid do you think they are of the monsters?" He turned to face Veronica. "Humans are a short-lived species. Apart from the elves, everyone treats the Dark Wave as an ancient legend. The Anzu kingdom cut itself away from the painful history, going so far as to forsake the kingdom's southern region. Tell me, is there any other place in all of the kingdom with a view of the Great Barrier?" Cohen's expression darkened as Veronica crossed her hands in prayer. "May the God of the Holy Light forgive us for our ignorance." She looked up, eyes of shimmering copper now dulled. "The Grand Duke is right. Our people have gotten lazy in peacetime. We've made useless trifles with the Typhon Empire. We've removed ourselves from the barrier that protects all of us." Gawain looked out to the dark mountains and recalled the view of the wastelands. "The elves are likely the only ones still looking after the Great Barrier. We do not seem to be interested at all." Gawain sighed. Still, the Typhon Emperor's reaction feels excessively aggressive. Cohen tilted his head. "Sir, are you implying that they are aware of the monsters at our border?" Gawain could only shrug. "I won't say anything because I have no clue what the Typhon Empire is like currently. The founders I knew have long perished." He continued on walking. With Rebecca and Amber, he escorted Veronica, Sandy, and Cohen to the central tent. A welcome feast was held for the guests of the royal capital. Most of the camp's food was supplied from Tanzan town. Apart from the wild animals the huntsmen captured, the livestock the camp had were all animals meant for reproduction, and the crops they started growing obviously were not ready for harvest yet. The meals, then, couldn't compare to the feasts in the capital, but as far as Gawain could tell, Veronica was not picky about the variety of food. Priestess Sandy and Count Cohen also enjoyed the feast without a problem. If they had any qualms, they did an expert job hiding it. The next day, Gawain gave Veronica and the others a tour of the camp. His secret projects were still far into the early phase, which meant what 2 priestesses and a royal knight saw would be pretty insignificant. None of them had ever taken special notice of a furnace, so when they saw the steelworks invention by Hummel, they simply attributed it to their definition of one. Gawain, of course, did not make any mention of the metal sphere. As he showed them the camp, his attention kept drifting towards Sandy. Still, she appeared like a glowing ball of light, a holographic entity made of a golden glow. He found it exceptionally strange that he was the only one who saw her that way. Veronica noticed the glance and leaned in tactfully. "Please forgive the High Priestess. Do you mind that she is reticent? She has always been that way." Gawain chuckled. "Haha, of course, it's nothing. She just reminds me of someone I met once, that's all. I apologize if my looks have caused any worry or offense." Veronica smiled. "Sandy wouldn't mind. She's been a good friend of mine for many years. She had converted to the Church of the Holy Light before I did. It was she who guided me along this path." Gawain nodded, masking his own skepticism of the religion. Veronica continued on as they strolled around the camp. "Sandy's devotion truly deserves respect. She remains quiet before us because she dedicates all of her words to the Lord of the Holy Light." Veronica looked out. "I see that your land is brimming with promise, but perhaps it is lacking faith." Gawain forced a smile. "I respect devout believers, but as you can see, my territory only has about 900 individuals, including the 100 workers you brought with you. Building houses and farming land expends a great amount of resources, and the construction of a church must be allocated at a later phase." Veronica offered a pious smile. "Faith should never become a burden for the citizens. It is a guidance and a strength. The God of Holy Light instructs us to treat people with an open mind and protect all living things. If you are willing, I would be more than happy to help you construct a church for the God of Holy Light in my name. I can guarantee you that apart from voluntary offerings, the church will not ask for any money from this land. All of the expenses will be covered by me, and at the same time, the church's clergy will provide treatment and enlightenment to your citizens without any cost." Though Gawain kept his plastered smile. "How can you make such a generous offer?" Veronica closed her eyes and lowered her head in gentle prayer. The sun cast her in a faintly holy radiance. "Please do not be skeptical. This is my way of extending goodwill to a legendary hero like you. My younger brother and I have both grown up listening to stories about you." Gawain's smile didn't falter as he replied, "The Cecil clan is thankful for your goodwill. I will consider this matter, but not now. Once the territory has stabilized and when my citizens require the guidance of faith, I will very much welcome your assistance." Veronica nodded. "No matter when you need help, the Lord will show concern for anyone. There might be plenty of gods, but only the God of Holy Light will pardon all wrongdoings. At the end of the Holy Light will be the final redemption for all." Throughout the next day, as he showed the St. Princess around, Gawain formed a rather good impression of Veronica. Apart from her fanaticism, she seemed to be a unique specimen amongst this world's nobility. She was amiable, even with the labourers and commoners who came across during their inspection of the camp. Gawain examined her closely, and couldn't find any trace of disdain for the people in her eyes. By contrast, Count Cohen never so much as looked directly at a serf, and always clicked his tongue impatiently whenever they had to wait for the labourers to pass by before moving to the next location. Gawain made mental notes of this situation. She could be this world's greatest actress, though I doubt the effort would be worth it, especially since everyone else is openly disdainful of the common people. Back at St. Soniel, Sir Byron had told Gawain that many suspected that Princess Veronica's conversion to the Church of the Holy Light was a political move to avoid a succession crisis. Yet, based on the princess's bearing, as far as Gawain could tell, her faith seemed quite genuine. In fact, she seemed just this side of being a pure zealot for the faith. Gawain never contradicted religion himself, especially when the real power of conviction existed in this world. He had viewed religion as a kind of necessity and natural phenomenon. Since the gods would protect the mortals who prayed to them, he wouldn't have malice towards the gods for no reason. However, he still didn't find Veronica's heavy-handed piousness appealing. In the end, he still maintained his previous life's attitude, to remain at a respectful distance from gods and demons. Veronica was keen enough to notice the change in Gawain's attitude, but she didn't think too much about it. She had viewed this situation as a noble being vigilant when an outside force was meddling with his regime. After all, her title as the Saint Princess still consisted of the word princess, and she would still have the shadows of the royal clan no matter what. Hence, on this topic, she would simply touch on it and leave it there. As the sun set on the second day, the royal guests prepared themselves to depart. Gawain, Heidi, and Rebecca saw them off. Amber followed from a distance. Though the half-elf affected an air of boredom, she still kept a wary eye on the guests, as if something was compelling about these guests that she wasn't able to admit out loud. The great ship, the White Oak, had turned itself about and was drifting gently in the water. Sailors rushed to and fro, readying the sails, tying off various ropes to keep the whole operation afloat, both figuratively and literally. Gawain watched the Saint Princess and her two ever-present companions walk up the gangplank. Just as they were about to step on the deck, Princess Veronica turned and walked back onto the jetty. "Duke Cecil, I have a rather presumptuous question that I have wanted to ask you, but I didn't dare ask until now. Will you please indulge the younger generation's curiosity?" Gawain chuckled and nodded. He had been playing the role of an old ancestor, so he was happy to continue the act. "If you have any questions, please ask." A faint smile danced across Veronica's lips. She spoke quietly, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of the river's waves against the shore. "While you were dead, did you perhaps see anything? Any afterlife?" She looked up and their eyes met. "Did you meet any gods?" Gawain leaned his head back. "There it is." Though she seemed perfectly affable, he could see the hunger of fanaticism in her eyes. He held out his hands. "I didn't." The priestess deflated. Gawain hastily spoke on. "Perhaps I didn't die thoroughly enough, and the gods didn't see me as truly dead. So I was left alone. Who can say?" Veronica's face became stoic once more, though Gawain sensed she still felt the sting of disappointment. She looked up at him with glowing eyes. "Thank you for your answer. I will be praying for you, your clan, and your territory." With that, the Saint Princess stepped onto the deck, rejoining Count Cohen and the glowing ball which she referred to as Priestess Sandy. The three of them vanished below decks and the ship departed, followed closely by the small clippers which served as guards. As the fleet disappeared beyond the tree line, Heidi, Rebecca, and Amber approached Gawain. Heidi cleared her throat. "She left just now. Did she not offer to establish a Church of the Holy Light here?" Gawain nodded, eyes still fixed on the river. "Yes, she did." Heidi blinked in confusion. "And yet you did not take her up on it. You refused the Saint Princess's goodwill." Gawain chuckled to himself. He turned to his descendant. "Do you think I behaved inappropriately?" He strode off the jetty and walked back towards the camp. Heidi hurried after him, speaking quickly. "The priests and priestesses from the Church of Holy Light have the ability to heal, as well as bring people peace. We lack medical personnel. Master Pitman is a qualified druid, but we cannot rely on one man for the long term. Treating the wounded has sapped our medicinal reserves. If we had a priest or two, that would help tremendously." Rebecca chimed in. "That's right. We can't provide a church, nor afford a priest, but if she was willing to provide her own personal funds to construct one for us. Amber grumbled behind them. Church of the Holy Light are pretentious jerks, so stubborn, always treating us worshippers of Lady Night as if we slaughtered their whole family. Rebecca rolled her eyes. That's just you. They're just upset you're always stealing holy relics from them. Amber snarled at Rebecca. Don't be ridiculous. None of those white-robed dwarf dunghills could catch me stealing. Gawain held up his hands to stop this argument. I know that her suggestion was very worthwhile, but I suspect that's not where the arrangement would end. Heidi, Amber and Rebecca all looked at Gawain curiously. Gawain stopped. They were still several feet outside of the main entrance in the camp's fence. Gawain looked around to make sure no one was listening in, and spoke. Do you think she'd only help us construct the church and send over a chaplain? Dame Heidi clicked her tongue. But, Ancestor, the Saint Princess has a reputation for even-handedness. Surely you don't think she would attempt to influence the clan in the name of the church? Gawain nodded. She wouldn't, but others might not be so scrupulous. Did you not see the people she brought along, a priestess and a knight of the king's inner circle? She never left their line of sight. The king and the church hover over her like pilot fish around the mouth of a shark. Little creatures not hunting by themselves but ready to scoop up any prey she wouldn't deign to devour. He shook his head. No, accepting that goodwill would leave us exposed to many political forces we are currently insulated from. Heidi and Rebecca exchanged a thoughtful glance. Gawain waved his hand. Besides, there's something else she said that troubles me. The three women leaned in to hear what Gawain was going to say. There might be plenty of gods, but only the God of Holy Light will pardon all wrongdoings. He repeated this phrase slowly, precisely recalling each word that Veronica had said. Don't any of you feel that there's something suspicious in that statement? Amber scratched her head. Suspicious? As suspicious as any silly holy light-headed priest. They love to declare that their God loves everyone like children. Gawain nodded. Of course, but that's just the second part of the statement. She said something before that. Heidi gasped. There might be many other gods. She's putting the God of Holy Light above the rest of the gods. Gawain nodded, his face a mask. It's an unassuming statement, but one that merits consideration. Gawain turned and walked toward the camp. Heidi, Amber and Rebecca followed him through the entrance. As they strode past their busy settlement, thoughts buzzed around each of their heads like flies around a corpse. They peeled off to their own tasks, without exchanging another word. Gawain already knew that this world had plenty of religions. Many were well reputed with massive followings, but others were far smaller. Some small hamlets and towns had their own minor gods and goddesses, and even some secret religions existed beyond the reach of most theological scholars. Each of the religions that could be passed on would have their individual theurgy. This would mean that a true god's power existed that supported them. A god or some magical energy at the very least. Even with so many religions, no holy wars have broken out in recent years. In fact, wars between races or countries were more likely here than wars of religion. Even if the nations broke out into war, the mainstream religions of those nations would be uninvolved. This wasn't always the case. In history, this continent had plenty of wars between religions. The history books were filled with how the religions annexed and invaded one another. Even in the heyday of the Gondolian Empire, there were still many minor religious conflicts within that unified nation. When Gawain was suspended in the sky during all those years, he had seen so many religions warring with each other that he became sick of them, especially since he couldn't turn his head or look away at the time. But no matter how each religion beat up the brains of each other, they were indeed at peace. All of the conflicts had stopped during the year of the Dark Wave, the year the gods remained silent. Following the departure of the royal envoy, many of the citizens of Clan Cecil's territory saw their liege pacing throughout the camp. It wasn't an uncommon sight after all. Gawain Cecil was well known to take an active involvement in every construction project, every farming operation, and every new task under the sun. Rumours had already spread that he would occasionally tear off his tunic and work the fields in the hot sun. But this was not the case on this day. This time Gawain walked in a daze, as if he didn't notice the action around him. His feet carried him by habit, dodging passers-by and walking well-trod paths. But his mind was far afield, lost in memories. Most priests, when channeling their holy magic, maintain some perceived connection with their deities, or what they assume are their deities. Gawain remembered that during the Dark Wave, that ability vanished. For as long as a year after the wave began, all believers couldn't commune with their gods. During that time, there were no prophecies, no revelations, no holy magic. It wasn't only mediocre priests and common believers. Even the high councils of major religions were in the dark. Of course, even in normal circumstances, humans were unable to directly hear the voices of gods. The so-called listening to the revelations of the gods actually referred to the almost hallucinatory soft murmurs that pious believers were able to hear in the process of sincere prayer, carrying out sacraments and testaments as their mental state had gotten close to the god's spiritual nature. This was the main path for the clergy in this world, to promote and become stronger. As those obscure whispers indeed had the power to alter humankind's consciousness and make every person stronger and purer, it was lifted out of those common auditory and visual hallucinations and were viewed as sacred phenomena by holy orders. These organizations did not react well to silence. It felt as if the gods had all disappeared. During that year, sects splintered. Some higher priests threw themselves from the tops of church towers, hoping that their sacrifice would reverse this dreadful turn of events. Some faiths splintered, forming separate sects and cults, which divided power across the land. As they'd lost divine grace, in that year, all the clergymen were unable to obtain promotions. Amongst the shallow believers and laymen, not a single new person who could grasp theurgy emerged. The babies born that year were even proven afterward to not possess any natural gift for theurgy. Just when things were at their most dire, people discovered that the mastered theurgies had not completely lost effect. Although the holy magic was not as strong as it once was, priests could still make use of theurgy. It was this, and only this, that saved many churches from being lost in chaos and factionalism. Gawain remembered that after despair, there were hopeful steps to progress. The leaders of major religions conducted secret talks and attempts at divine communication more than once. People gave up on their former prejudices and hostilities. Just like laymen who advanced shoulder to shoulder amidst the dark wave, clergymen no longer had any qualms about their respective beliefs and historical hatreds. In turn, they gathered together and attempted to find a solution to the problem. Subsequently, the few large-scale sects representing the god of holy light, the god of war, and the three goddesses of fertility finally found some progress. On the summit of the ancestral peak, at Anzu's border with the tribal country of Algari, they attempted to communicate with the gods. It was a private meeting, and no one knew what transpired there, apart from those who bore witness to the event itself. Even Gawain Cecil wasn't privy to the secrets of the ancestral peak. He only knew that the leaders of the sects announced after leaving the summit that the gods had sent a new message, a sign for mortals to abandon their disputes and strive to survive in unity. After all, the Dark Wave was a disaster brought on by humanity's weakness. That day the sects signed an agreement called the Sacred Alliance. They renounced all disputes regarding beliefs. The sects no longer opposed one another and would do their utmost best for humanity, regarding the continuation of human civilization as their responsibility. And as if it was really such acts that had pleased the gods, in the second month after the signing of the Sacred Alliance, the same day as the 1-year anniversary of the Dark Wave, the gods' graces were bestowed upon humankind once more. Believers could hear them again. This was what Gawain knew of the various religions' histories. The signing of the Sacred Alliance had changed many things. It ended the conflict between various beliefs on the continent and also united the clergymen of every sect, joining hands to help human civilization resist the Dark Wave and rebuild their homeland. However, there were also some unduly obstinate sects that could not accept such a compromise. They chose degeneration, setting all the sects who signed the Sacred Alliance as their enemy. They became various twisted heterodoxies and gradually evolved into a few of the most dreaded dark organizations. The theurgies they used were also named dark theurgies. Even to this day, those degenerated and warped fanatics remain one of the most terrifying shadows in this world. Gawain naturally had a very high opinion of the Sacred Alliance, since he saw what use it had for everyone's benefit. Although he would describe himself as an atheist, he really admired those believers who, in the moment of crisis, put down their conflict, united as one, and worked hard for the continuity of civilization regardless of whether those efforts were due to the gods' orders or not. But he also knew that no matter how effective a law or compromise was, it would not withstand the erosion of time, especially for a race with short lives, unlike their elven neighbors. The growing conflict between Anzu and Typhon was indicative of this. No matter how close they were in the past, they could easily become enemies in time. And 700 years was more than enough time for later generations to forget the significance of the meeting at Ancestral Peak. Presently, although the sects of the continent still maintained a peaceful picture, in reality, the disputes and discrimination in private had never lessened. Some sects with huge differences in their religious doctrine had also come to the point where they were just a step away from openly declaring war. After all, no one could truly listen clearly to what exactly the gods were telling them. The ambiguity in divine messages was all humans needed to improvise. Gawain blinked, becoming aware of his surroundings. He had walked to the southern part of the camp and stood facing the warehouse where Hummel's assistants were storing Rebecca crystals. He sighed and rubbed his head. This is why Veronica's comments bothered him so much. The Sacred Alliance made it so that no priest or priestess of any religion would publicly place their gods over the gods of any other. Yet Veronica did. She could have spoken without thinking, but that seemed unlikely. He stroked his chin. Religion is unavoidable in this or my previous world. But I guess this time I just have to keep a close eye on the truest of believers. Gawain returned toward his tent. The news of tensions brewing at the border with Typhon reminded Gawain that things were more complicated than just warding off demons. Gawain strode into his tent. It was empty, apart from the stacks of plans and notes on his desk, his simple bed, and Betty sleeping on a cushion, fast asleep. He chuckled to himself. The little maid was murmuring to herself, clearly dreaming. He decided against waking her, and instead went to his stacks of blueprints. He went over these old documents one by one, sorting out the useful ones from the impractical ones. He didn't plan on ever destroying his work, but needed to keep focused on the here and now. After a while, he found what he was looking for. It was a certain simplified machine metal wheels connecting rods and cylinder blocks were assembled together. There were the split-up and detailed explanations of these mechanisms and structures on the blueprints. However, at the bottom of the main blueprint was a line of striking red words, scratched out by a frustrated hand. Initial motive power could not be resolved, temporarily shelved. He stood and strode over to Betty. He gently shook the maid by her shoulder. Her eyes opened very slowly and she yawned. After a moment she sat up, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Gawain placed his hands together. "Go get Rebecca and Heidi, please. Tell them I have something." He took a look at her bleary expression and realized the futile nature of giving her any specific instructions. "Never mind, just find them." Betty saluted and rushed off. A voice sounded behind Gawain. "What are you drawing?" Gawain jumped. Amber materialized out of the shadows. She held up the blueprint, her eyes crossed as she tried to make sense of it. "Why can't I understand this?" Gawain walked over to his desk. He slapped away Amber's hand as she reached for his silver stamp. "It's just a motive power trigger. In theory, this is something that can operate continuously and drive other mechanisms and structures. But I haven't finished the design." Amber set down the blueprint. "Oh? What are you missing? Elemental cores for magic puppets?" Gawain shook his head. "No, it needs to be more universal. It's just missing boiling water."